Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is one of the viewers requested ideas, if you know what I mean. I asked for ideas of future videos, and this one came up, and this one's unusual. I decided to do it as a voice track with some pictures because I can't film the subject because the subject's imaginary. And the idea is that I give you an impression, so you've got to use your imaginations here, of what would be my perfect growing environment for orchids. Obviously if money was no object, which it is, so it ain't going to happen, but yeah, my dream orchid growing environment. Obviously I'd have to take actual measurements to get this right, but the concept would remain the same. My perfect growing environment would in effect be a greenhouse, but it would be based on something that's very old-fashioned by nature, and it's called a pit greenhouse, which to construct would involve digging the most massive hole, which would have to be about 4 foot deep and large enough for the interior of the grow space to be the measurements I wanted. So we're starting with a big hole, yeah, and then what we're going to do is we're going to bore the base of that hole quite deep with sort of quite large columns, say, you know, I don't know, 5 or 6 inches, and going down a further 2 or 3 feet, which would be filled with gravel. There's a reason for that, we'll get to that in a minute. And then the bottom of the hole would be covered with a layer of probably about 6 inches of gravel again, yeah, and then basically an exterior strong wall would be built up to ground level and a bit, doesn't need to be much above ground level. That would then be insulated, and then another wall would be built on the inside of that, and the internal measurements of that construction would be my required grow space, yeah. And to get down into this grow space we would have steps, yeah, leading to a door, you know, an entrance. So now we've got half of our grow space already built. We haven't even done glass yet. There's a reason for this. This goes back a long time ago and involves not conservation but energy conservation, trying to be a bit green. So the reason for having half of the grow space underground with insulation is that once you go down a bit below the ground surface, there's an ambient temperature that's just maintained, yeah, and with insulated walls like that, cold and heat would become irrelevant, yeah. So that's half of it done, and then on the surface we would have what you would call the top half of the greenhouse, and this would be constructed hopefully of metal, simply because it would last probably longer than I ever will, whereas a wooden construction is better and I'd much prefer it, but it needs a lot of maintenance to look after it and will eventually rot no matter how well you look after it. So a metal construction. So the tradition for building a greenhouse is, in the northern hemisphere, you have it facing north-south. The reason being that it gets the maximum sun, you know, rises in the east, goes over the top and sets in the west type of principle. I don't want that. That's no good to me. That's bright light over the whole of the grow space all day long. Not interested. So I would go east-west. And there's a reason for that, because one side then faces the brightest light and the other side doesn't. That's already creating micro environments in my grow space, and that's before I even get any plants in there. So I've now got a bright side and a shadier side. Now the width of this grow space needs to be enough that I can have staging down both sides and across the far end, plus staging down the middle with room to walk all the way round it. So can you sort of picture that? So you come in the door, you've got a choice, you go down the steps and come in the door, and you've got a choice of going left or right, and whichever way you go, you walk round in a sort of oblong shape and come back to where you started. Now it would have relatively low sides with an apex, you know, with a roof, but that roof would be slightly different. Now this is not quite so easy to describe. The roof would leave the sides at an angle, and then halfway up that angle would be quite steep to start with, and halfway up the angle would change and become flatter. So that gives me an apex halfway up the roof where it changes, and that point will be important in a minute. Okay, and ideally, if possible, somewhere in here would be like a workroom, you know, so once you get inside the place there would be another door into an enclosed space that would be half glass, half not, but you know, it would have shelves to put pots and chemicals and things on. It would have a workbench for potting and mounting and things like that. So it would be within the greenhouse grow space environment, but separate. And that would need a little air conditioning unit to make it comfortable for me to work in. So when the greenhouse is up at 28, 29 degrees, this little workspace wouldn't be. It would be at whatever temperature I chose. Preferably about 21, 22 is my nice working temperature. And it wouldn't, you know, obviously I'd need the humidity taken out of there to make, I'd like a comfortable working place for storage, pots and stuff, and, you know, all that sort of thing as a separate thing, but still self-contained. So, right, now to staging. All down one side and the other side and across the end would be staging at a relatively low level. I don't want high shelves. It means stretching. I don't want really low shelves. It means bending. Yeah. So a reasonable height for that level of staging. The central staging that you can walk all the way around could be a little bit higher, and that would be tiered. Yeah, because it's the length of the grow space. Yeah, it can have a higher point down the middle of it. Yeah, because I've got the height of the roof above that section. Yeah, and that central staging would probably be for the largest plants, because from the staging to the roof is the highest possible point. Yeah, so that's the sort of basic layout. And to accommodate that staging, the width of this grow space would have to be about 4 meters, I expect. You know, about 2.6, 2.7 each side, followed by the staging in the middle, and I need room to walk around it. So it's going to be quite wide, unlike a lot of traditional greenhouses that tend to be narrow and long, so relatively wide. The length of it would be open to debate, simply because if money was no object, how big would I really want it? You know, so the length of this whole thing would be subject to thinking, you know, about how much I'm going to put in there, what I really want, you know, that sort of thing. So, you know, I've got no specific size, but I'd like it wide to accommodate the layout. Right, then, so we've got our short sides with our angled roof, starting off quite steeply and then sloping off. Right, the next thing we need to do, bearing in mind we're east-west, the side that faces the sun all day long needs heavy shading. Now, I don't want permanent shading. What I want is shading that's there when I want it and not when I don't. So what I would like is a shutter system set up on that side of the greenhouse, at least a foot away from the glass, and starting at ground level, a foot away from the glass, up beyond the apex of the roof, so slightly over the top of the roof. And that would be controlled by light sensors. So on a dull day there may be no shading at all, and on the brightest day would be heavy shading, and that would need to be a shutter type system, motorized, controlled by a light sensor. Yeah, so that's the shading done. Don't need shading on the other side, the sun's never going to hit it. But if I wanted to, I could put your traditional shading there. If I wanted a really extra shady portion, I could actually shield the other side for a portion of the greenhouse. But I think with the main light source coming in from one direction mainly, and the shutter system, and all the plants in the centre of the grow space, what would be the farthest side from the light is automatically shaded a little bit extra by the plants in the middle. I'm used to using plants for extra shading and getting these little microclimates. Now the next thing would be automation. We've already done the automated shading. Sell your house to pay for that lot. I hate to think what that sort of apparatus would cost, but we're dreaming here. It's all about dreamland. Yeah. So now inside, I would like an automated irrigation system for one reason and one reason only. I can walk away and have a holiday, which at the moment is incredibly difficult. So it would be a sprinkler based system that could either be run on a timer or could be run based on a humidity level, whatever. But an automated watering system. So this isn't little misting systems, this is water, yeah, coming out from up near the roof above the plants that is capable of getting everything soaking wet. So obviously that system would only get used when it's warm. I wouldn't dream of soaking plants when it's cooler in the winter. But then I'm going to have a heating system, so do I really want it cooler in the winter? Well, yes, at least part of it. Now we come to the next more clever bit, I suppose, which I've always really wanted to do. Halfway along this greenhouse or grow space would be a division. And it would have a door through that division on both sides. And that gives me the ability to have a warm section and a cool section in the same grow space. So now I've got my intermediate section. I'm not interested in growing warm because I wouldn't be comfortable in there anyway. So I've got my intermediate section and I've got my section that can be maintained a bit cooler by use of air conditioning if necessary. But the main thing is in the warmer weather, you know, from sort of early spring through to into autumn, the normal temperatures are fine in the UK. I don't need heating to maintain the intermediate, yeah. But I might like something to just cool down that cooler section during those warmer months. Now in the winter months, I do need a cool section. I need my, you know, resting dendrobiums to cool down. But again, the minimum night temperature can be controlled by a heater. The minimum night temperature in the intermediate section via a heater on a thermostat can now stay warmer, which means some of my plants which object to the cooler winters now in the grow space I've got don't need to worry so much. So I've got two temperature sections. Right. Humidity, hydrofoggers on hydrostats. There's just no question about that. That's already what I'm doing. I don't need to change that. But what I would get is the most powerful one I could get, and the reason for that is energy saving. Because the more powerful it is, the faster it does its job and the quicker it turns off. Right. Air circulation. In the intermediate section, I would like a large fan built in to the end wall that's capable of pulling air in from outside. That's what I've got now. I've got an inlet fan now, and most of the time it does a good job. So that's not only getting fresh air in, but it's getting cooler air in. That will save a bit on heating at certain times of the year. To get the air out, At the moment I've got an extractor fan for the sole reason I've got nothing I can open. I've got no ventilation as such. I can't open the door, I can't open the window, it's all sealed. There's nothing I can do. So this Growspace would have top vents. So you go back to the angle of the roof. I've got this quite steep angle heading up from the sides that then has a kink in it, and half of it will be not so steep. That's where the ventilation needs to be, because that's where the heat will collect. And I don't want openings like most other people would have, which are hinged at the top and open from the lower end. I want them to open the other way. So I want them hinged halfway up the roof where it changes shape, and they will open at the top. Can you picture that? That means that heat goes straight out. It's got nothing in its way, straight out the top. So that's a bit different. Those would be thermostatically controlled. Those would be temperature controlled. Possibly with some sort of manual override, I don't know. It shouldn't really be necessary if the thermostats work properly. So that gets hot air out, and a very large inlet fan, and the larger they are, the less fast they have to turn and the less noise they make, and the less I have to glue my wig on to stop it flying off when I walk in the Growspace. So hopefully you're getting a picture now. A pit Growspace with a funny shaped roof that's quite steep at first and then tapers off. Ventilation at the top of that to let heat out. Very large fan at one end to get cooler, fresher air in. Now, because I've divided this thing in half, yeah, I still haven't got air to come in the other end, if you see what I mean. That large fan could be in the door, you know, down the steps, in through the door. That fan could be in the door, although I'd have wires going across. Yeah, that's manageable. That's not a big deal. So that would be my layout, really. A lot of automation there, automatic humidity. Automatic watering system, something I've never thought of or never thought to own, but I have trouble getting away from my orchids at the moment, and I'd like to think that an automated system could get over that in the main, yeah. And by absolutely drowning everything, you know, relatively short space of time, you can get a lot of water out of a sprinkler type system. I don't mean a rotating sprinkler, but not the misters, you know, the normal sort of sprays, I suppose you could call it, set up in the roof, you know. And then I've got hanging space, because this funny angled roof that I'm on about has got an automatic halfway point where it changes its angle, so I can have bars along there to hang plants, yeah. I don't really want them hanging from the very top, the apex, because that's where I want my tall plants on the staging. So I'd like that to stay clear. So I don't want anything hanging right up in the pointy bit at the top. That stays clear, hot air out, ventilators that can open and shut. Over the ventilation openings would have to be a fine mesh to keep bugs out. See, I'm quite lucky at the moment. Bugs have got a job to get in my place, because I haven't got any openings, but this would have openings, so I would need a fine mesh over those so that when they open the bugs don't come in. So yeah, that's about it really. So say you have to use your imagination, but that would sort of be a dream setup. It would have to be built. You can't buy that sort of thing in. So it would have to have a proper spec, you know, with drawings, and men would have to come in, and diggers to dig the big hole and all that sort of stuff. And what I did forget to say is, last time we talked about the floor, we had it covered in gravel. No. You know that wasn't finished. What I would then like is a framework over the top of that gravel, leaving a gap, yeah? And I'd love one of those really old-fashioned cast iron grill systems that you walk on with the holes in, like you see in those, you know, like if you went to some of the glass houses at Kew Gardens. You're walking on like a cast iron sheet of metal with holes all over it, yeah. And that enables, back to the flooring, when I'm doing my massive spraying and all that sort of stuff, and all that water's going down all over the plants and dripping onto the floor, it's got to have somewhere to go. So it will go through these cast iron grills into the gravel bed, helping to keep the humidity up. And if it gets a bit extra wet, it goes down the boreholes, which are also filled with gravel, and soaks away. That's what that was for. Yeah, it's a way of getting rid of water and not having to go in there with me welly boots on because it's 3 inches deep. In theory, that shouldn't happen, because the only time those huge spray systems are going to come on is when I'm not watering, when I'm not doing it myself. I'd still want to do that myself. I'd still want to do the hands-on thing, but I'd like the ability to walk away for longer periods than a couple of days. So, what do you think of that lot then? I hope you can picture all that. I don't know how descriptive I've been, but this is based on something I once visited, and this idea of having half of the grow space or greenhouse underground really appeals to me. It also gives me some really shaded places, because most greenhouses, they might have a low wall, but they're bright over the whole area. By having this, extra deep area with no glass, gives me some quite shady areas if I choose to have them. They would also be quite humid as well, because don't forget that area is surrounded by a wall. That's going to get wet, that will give off humidity, and it will also store heat. So when in the winter we've had a bit of sun during the day, it's warmed up a little bit like that, those walls will work like storage heaters. They will give off their heat overnight and then replenish that heat the next day when it warms up. That saves on the heating bill. I know I said money's no object, but I'm very conscious I do not like wasting energy, because it's got to be produced, and at the moment it's not being produced in the way I would prefer. We're still burning too much muck and chucking it up in the atmosphere. So using less at least helps there, until governments and whatever get their flipping act together and start going a lot greener. But we can do our little bit. So that's my dream grow space. Having got 2 sections in there, the types of plants I can grow has now expanded as well. So I might start looking at some other types of orchids to get in this dream space. And of course, if money was no object, I'd be buying specimen plants. None of this seedling nonsense. Anyway, that was a nice idea, whoever suggested that one. We've all got dreams. We've got to have a dream, and that would be mine. And it would exist. As I said, if money was no object, I'm not interested in a flashy boat or a yacht or a flashy car or anything like that. Those sort of things don't really appeal to me. A car gets you from A to B. Whether it costs, I don't know, £30,000 or £300,000, you're still stuck in the same flipping traffic, aren't you? That sort of thing, that doesn't appeal to me. And I don't want a flashy boat because I ain't too good on the water. I don't swim. I might have a plane though. There's a thought. Would I have a plane? No. I'd probably have a helicopter. Far more choices of places to land and take off. Now we're wandering off, aren't we? And of course, the house that this grow space was in the garden of would have a nice garden. Doesn't need to be huge, but it would have a really large pond in it, with some wildlife and stuff like that. And in the house there would be one room set aside for music, like a recording studio. Lots of instruments, there'd be a drum kit, amplifiers, different guitars and stuff, good quality sound system in there, and a brilliant pair of headphones so I don't have to drive the neighbours mad. But then in my dream world, my neighbours would be too far away to hear any noise that I made. There we go then, my dream grow space. Do you know what, I've just had a thought. We could treat this a little bit like a tag. So I'm going to now ask 2 other people that do videos to imagine their dream grow space and do a video for that. And then when they've done theirs, they could perhaps ask another two. Now that may fall flat on its face, because mine's so good nobody else wants anything different. Ha ha. No, everybody would have their different ideas. Some people's grow space would be part of their house, it would be inside. Yeah, because don't forget, I've now got to go outside and get soaking wet in the rain to get to my grow space, which I don't have to do at the moment. That doesn't make me rethink though. So yeah, I'll think about that, but I'll do that as a separate video, a sort of grow space tag perhaps. I don't think it will go very far, quite honestly, but a little extra idea. Anyway, thanks for listening, and as I said, I wanted to do this as like a voiceover, so what you've been watching while I've been waffling away here are just my stills that I use for my pop-ups of orchids I've either got now or have once owned, just to have some pretty blooms to look at. Because at the end of the day, isn't that what it's all about? See you next time. Of course, I always forget to say something, don't I? All the water used in there would need to be RO water. That again would have large storage tanks and a sort of ball valve apparatus whereby as the tanks drop down their level they would automatically fill from the pressure mains, so I would never have to worry about the RO water being there, because obviously the sprayers that I talked about, I don't want that being tap water unless this happened to be built in an area where the tap water was good, in which case it would be okay. But nonetheless, I would still want quite large quantities of RO water, and those storage tanks would need to be in the grow space. They can go under the staging somewhere, you know, and they can be driven by a pump when necessary to get the RO water to the sprayers. So that's that side. And the other thing I forgot is lighting. Yeah. Yes, I would like supplemental lighting, but I would like it to be used, as I do now with the lighting I had for last winter, to do nothing more than maintain a day length. But the beauty of the money no object is that they would be light sensor controlled. So even on a real dull, miserable day in the summer, the lights would come on, because the light level would drop below the required amount of light that I want. So there will be an overall timer that says there is a 12-hour maximum for light, and during that 12 hours the lights would only come on if required. Now obviously in the short days of winter they're going to be required every day, because we only get, you know, whatever, 8 hours of daylight, so they would come on a dull day all day for 12 hours. On a bright day they would just come on towards the end of the day as it starts to get dark, which is what I tried to do last winter with the supplemental lighting. So yes, I would have lights. As I said, I want to be able to walk away and just leave it. So the supplemental lighting would have a control timer that says these lights do not come out outside of this period, but during this period they will come on when the light levels get low, irrespective of the time of year basically. And that would maintain adequate light levels year round. That would be a real luxury, yeah. And the sort of high light requirements in the summertime when we get dull periods would still be maintained then, yeah. And again, there's little micro environments. You've got automated lighting systems, those would need to be up in the roof. The ones that need the high light go on the higher shelves or closer to the lights. Those that don't need so much can go farther away. That's just plant placement, you know, that's nothing clever. I do that anyway, even when I haven't got lights. So yeah, nice clean water, and an automated system to maintain tanks of that water, pump system for the sprayers, and some sort of tap, so that if I just want to take some RO water and do some watering myself, because don't forget we haven't done feed yet, I don't want an automated feeding system. I would always want control of that. So at times when I'm fertilising, yeah, I would want my RO water put out separately so that I could then water my plants with the feed that I choose for this particular feeding session for this set of plants. I don't think that ever goes away, not for me anyway. I wouldn't want all the plants fed at the same rate. If you think of a sprinkler system, you know, I don't want the same water on my Vandas then going on my Masdevallias. Yeah? So, yeah, a little addendum, a little bit on the end. I bet if I sit here long enough I could think of more, but there's a time limit on a video. Can't be here for hours, can I? So there we go, my dream grow space. A lot of automation in there, but still with manual overrides and still with me needing to be there a fair old bit of the time. I can't see any point of having a fantastic orchid collection and never going there because it's fully automated. What would be the point? The whole point of growing the orchids is to enjoy them, to be there with them, to pick them up, handle them, look at their progress, look forward to those spikes getting their buds and then those buds opening out into the sort of blooms you've been looking at. That's the point. Yeah, completely automated system, you're effectively becoming, well, even worse than a nursery. You're becoming like those mass producers where there's no people involved. It's all automated. I don't think I'd ever want anything like that. Anyway, go and have your fantasies and see what you come up with. That's my ideas. Hope you enjoyed that daft video, really, but it wasn't my idea. I'm holding my hands up now. Not guilty. It wasn't my idea. Just doing as I was asked. See you next time. Bye for now.